who is with us from Kiev. First, I will introduce her, and then I will give the floor to her to talk about the ecological consequences of the Ukraine war and how it redraws the map of Ukraine and the world. But first, let me introduce our speaker. So, Tetiana Perga received her PhD from the Kiev State University in Ukraine, and she has been working at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine for more than 30 years. And in the meantime, she has a new research project at the Technical University of Berlin. She has been research fellow at many institutions, including the Simon Dubnov Institute in Leipzig. She received a DAAD, a German Academic Exchange Service scholarship at the Leibniz Institute for Ost- und Südosteuropa-Forschung at Regensburg, as well as at the Heidelberg University. She was awarded Volkswagen Foundation scholarship, as well as she was a scholar at the Alexandria Institute at Helsinki University in Finland. And as I mentioned, she has a project that just started 8 months ago at the Technical University of Berlin on waste recycling, something that you actually read about already for the last occasion. She's member of the European Society for Environmental History, and she's actually the regional representative for Ukraine. She's also a member of the Leo Baeck Institute, Jerusalem, and in a research group which looks at environmental history of jewelry, as well as she's editorial board member of journals including American History and Politics and European History Studies published in Ukraine. She's a very prolific author. She has more than 100 articles, co-authored books, as well as she published 2 monographs in Ukrainian. One is on the global environmental policy and Ukraine, and the other one is on the environmental policy of the United States. She has a couple of very important publications. Recently, the most recent one is actually from the Journal of Family History, which at first sight may be outside of the realm of environmental history, but then we actually learned from the publication that she looks at animal studies and the problem of extermination of squirrels in interwar and post-World War Soviet Union, and how school children were involved in this practice. A very, very important and very interesting article, which I had a chance to read yesterday, as well as she has a recently published article in Environmental History on Ukrainian waste management during the Soviet regime. And today's talk will be about nature under fire, how the war redraws the ecological map of Ukraine and the world. And before handing over the word to you, I would like again, thank you very much for being with us. I know that you are actually trying to save whatever is available in Kiev in the archive. So we are very happy actually to have a completely different insight into the environmental consequences of war than if we discussed only in this classroom. So I'm really thankful, and we are all thankful that you accepted our invitation, and I will hand over the word to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning or good evening for some colleagues. It's my great pleasure and my great honor to give this presentation, and I'm thankful to Dr. András Vadas for my invitation and for the invitation to give this lecture. And the aim of this presentation is not only to present the environmental consequences of Russian wide-scale war against Ukraine, but also to demonstrate a wider range of trends which often remains in the shadow. And of course, I will focus my attention on Ukraine and on the situation in Ukraine. The next slide, please. And first of all, I would like to emphasize that from the very beginning, this war demonstrated and demonstrates the signs of ecocide, which increasing from year to year. And in this side, I defined ecocide as the mass destruction of the natural environment, causing serious long-term and large-scale harm to ecosystems, animal plants, and the people who depended on them. And I use this concept of ecocide in this presentation to demonstrate the wide-scale consequences of the war. The next slide, please. And first of all, I would like to focus your attention that all territory of Ukraine is under the threat. And not only the eastern or the western territories, which are more close to front line. And according to preliminary estimates, the damage of Ukraine's environment amounted to more than $73 billion currently. And on this slide, there is an old figure, 62 and $9 billion dollars, but I stress that currently this damage is 73 billion, and this demonstrates that from day to day, this damage to Ukrainian economy and infrastructure and environment has been increasing. And the main factors of damage to environment are following: military activities, fires, migration and displacement, infrastructure damage and reconstruction, industrial accidents and abandonment, losses in frontline areas, the environmental governance and monitoring systems. And the impact of this war is direct and indirect. And that's why these precise evaluations at the moment are absent, and it is very hard to evaluate the environmental consequences, particularly from the perspective of the long-term period. And however, the figures which are present in the public space and which our ministries and different official bodies present, they demonstrate the main trends of this damage and its increasing. The next slide, please. Destruction of ecosystems and harm to biodiversity. Ukraine is a home to 35% of European biodiversity, and that's why destruction of biodiversity is a very dangerous tendency. Hostility can lead to significant, sometimes irreversible losses of biodiversity, destroying valuable natural habitats, posing a severe threat to the survival of rare plants and animal species. 75,000 individuals or specimens of wildlife are destroyed. 750 species of plants and fungi listed in the Red Book, and 900 species of plants and animals are under the threat. And except direct destruction or extinction of biodiversity, the main threat to biodiversity is the spread of invasive species of flora and fauna. And the reasons for the spread of invasive species are following: introduction of new invasive species along with military equipment and ships, favorable conditions for the reproduction of old ones, and the fact that during the evacuation, many people released their aquarium contents into the water bodies. And that's why invasive species penetrated through this way to many ecosystems. And on this slide, one can see some plant. It's titled Sparabolus cryptandrus, and this is one of the invasive species which began to penetrate to Ukrainian territory from the east of Ukraine, from Lugansk reserve. The next slide, please. But one of the more brightest example of the penetration of invasive species of animals is the house mouse or Mus masculinus. And the videos of hundreds of mice in the trenches of Ukrainian army have flooded the Ukrainian internet in autumn 2023. And artillerymen suffer especially because in blindages, mice eat everything: cables, thermometers, scales, gunpowder for mines, headphones, plastics, and many elements military devices. They are packed in plastics. And on this slide, on the bottom, near the mouse, one can see the plastics. And I made screens from some video, and there were two alive mice which ate something in this plastic. And as soldiers demonstrated, the mice even tried to gnaw helmets. And mice can carry the diseases, tularemia and leptospirosis, and that's why many combatants are under the threat. And as the combatant said, the mice stink very strongly, and many dead mice is around blindages, in blindages also, and a smell is horrible there. The next slide, please. Destruction of ecosystem, harm to animals. The war had a disastrous impact on animals. Many animals died as a result of military activities. Many animals had been driven to the brink of extinction, for example, babak, marmot, steep glass, and many other species. And of course, the most of these species are located on the territories on the east of Ukraine, or the south, on the south of Ukraine, which are located more close to the front line. And many species had to migrate to other regions, often unknown to them. And for example, many migratory routes of birds ran through the war zones. And the search of new roads and habitats is associated with a decrease in the reproduction of offspring. And I have read some late investigations, and the biologists say that some species of birds, in result of change in such migratory routes, add 85 kilometers and 55 hours of flight. And one more factor is that at the beginning of the war, many private zoos, they were under threat. They had not food to feed animals, and that's why they had to release many animals into the wild. And particularly, you can see an elk going for a walk on the streets of Ukraine and of Kiev particularly. And one more fact which I would like to stress is during the war, the shooting of animals with the purpose of the animal species control is prohibited. That's why all these facts resulted in the emergence of many wild or feral animals which are moving on the wildlife. However, they also moving to cities, and particularly in the cities. And searching food, animals often enter populated areas. When interacting with people, animals often get into a stressful situation and can run out onto the road. And the situation with foxes is particularly alarming. This photo of foxes also from Kiev. And during the war, the population of foxes, due to, as I said, the banning of their shooting, had increased 5 times to 220,000. The problem is that foxes can transmit the rabies, which can then spread to domestic animals such as cats and dogs. And as the number of contacts with homeless animals increased, the number of people who suffered from their attacks also increased. And this caused the increasing of infection with the rabies. And in 2023, 700 cases of rabies were registered in Ukraine, and many cases were reported in Kramatorsk and along the front line, where wild foxes have been entering trenches in search of the food. And some Ukrainian combatants were bited with foxes, and there was, for the first years of the war, during the first years of the war, it was a problem with the anti-rabies vaccine. And another case or another maybe example which demonstrates the impact of the animals is the case with dolphins. The explosion of Kakhovka gas and dam and the work of shadow tanker fleet transporting oil, this Russian fleet, as well as pollution of body resources and penetration of many pollutants into the Black Sea, severely damaging marine ecosystems and leading to the death of many dolphins. And their dead bodies were found on the territory of Crimea, but also on the territory of Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey. However, the precise number of dead dolphins is absent, and it is impossible to evaluate. And researchers said the figures from 3,000 to 50,000 individuals of the dolphins that have died. The next slide, please. Ukraine's natural reserves are under the threat, and the damage to Ukraine's natural reserves is estimated at the level more than $50 billion. And what happens to protected territories? In result of Russian practices of poaching on these territories, many animals are killed, and you see some photo. Destruction of administrative buildings, making it impossible to carry the further scientific and environmental activities. And the moving of Russian military equipment damages or destroys plants and frightens animals. And there is a practice of stealing animals. And for example, on another photo of this slide, you see the photo of raccoon, which was stolen from a Ukrainian zoo. And this photo is quite famous. And of course, there is a question, why did Russian soldiers do this, and what will be the destiny of this animal? The next slide, please. Ukraine has many natural reserves, and one of the most famous and the oldest natural reserve is Ascania Nova. 20 animals were stolen and transported to Russia from this nature reserve. Some animals died due to lack of care and absence of veterinary assistance. Some were killed due to shooting. Military training grounds were established on the territory of this reserve and other reserves. And in addition, large areas of protected steppe, more than 2,000 hectares, were destroyed by fires in various origins. And all this only on the territory of Ascania Nova. But on this slide, you can see the list of some natural reserves of Ukraine and their destiny. And for example, Lovodnipa Natural Park was fully flooded and 12% of the area was burned. The Holy Mountain National Park lost about 80% of its forest to fires, and these are pictures from different reserves. And one can see that not only forests and biodiversity was fired, but also some animals died here. And at the moment, 25 protected areas currently under Russian occupation or regularly shelled. And under the threat of destruction are 40 Ramsar sites, 5 biosphere reserves and 160 territories of the Emerald Network with an area about 3 million hectares. The next slide, please. What destroys Ukrainian soil? And the damage to Ukrainian soil at the moment is more than $25 billion. And Ukraine is known for its Chernozem. Chernozem is Ukrainian word, but in translation, it's mean a black soil. And this is a soil with a very high level of fertility. And historically, due to presence of such soil, Ukraine in the Middle Ages and during the times of Russian Empire and on the Soviet Union and during the times of independence was one of the largest exporter of agriculture products on the world market. And in result of the war, 20% of Ukrainian arable lands and are polluted, and the Chernozem cover 60% of Ukrainian territory, and that's why the majority of lands with Chernozem are under the threat, and they are withdrawn from the agricultural use. And I also would like to stress that Ukraine has 25% of the world's total Chernozem reserves. And the movement of heavy vehicles, construction of fortifications, and explosions from shells and missiles caused severe damage to land resources. And you can see on this slide different manifestations, and such big dig. This is it appeared after some shelling, and the slide where you see some dots on the green color demonstrates in some place the pollution with military device of some plot of arable land. The next slide, please. Mining. At the moment, Ukraine is the most mined country in the world. And about 30% of its territory is mined. And on this slide, one can see different sorts or different forms of military devices, and particularly of mines. And the experts say that if demining will continue with the current speed, it's not very quickly, the full demining of Ukrainian territories will need at least 70 years. And the cost of demining the territories is more than $34 billion. And on the bottom of this slide, you can see the Russian know-how, and this is a fresh know-how. And I'm in Kiev for 3 months and for 3 weeks, and 2 weeks ago the information appeared in mass media and on TV that Russian military drones disseminated such devices, as you see, such black sticks, and that this is some kind of explosive devices, and they were even found on the territory of Kiev, but most of them are disseminated by drones in the rare settlements and in the small cities. The next slide, please. Destruction of water resources. The damage to water resources is currently is more than $2 billion. And damage to water resources caused by water is manifested in the following measures. The pollution of water bodies and seawater by military ammunition or fuel oil, etc. The pollution of water bodies and seawater by extraneous objects destroying infrastructure and waste, and unauthorized use of water resources. The next slide, please. The war's impact on air quality. The damage to air quality is more than $18 billion. And this slide represents the main sources of air pollution, and it is the burning oil and oil products. And on this table, in green color, one can see that the primary targets of Russian attacks are oil depots, storage facilities, and of course, this transforms them in one of the main sources of air pollution. But also the second source is burning of forests, and more than 56 million tons of pollutants or mixtures from all emission sources were released into the atmosphere. And all experts, Ukrainian and foreign, they stress the danger of these permanent fires, and more than 22,000 fires were caused by explosions in the result of hostilities, and more than 1,600 fires occurred at protected ecosystem sites. The next slide, please. Waste. What produces or generates a lot of waste? And more than 20 million tons of new waste were generated during the war. And the main threats of pollution by waste are following: an increase in the volume of new waste, the destruction of existing warehouses with old waste, and the fact that temporary occupied territories are gradually turning into the old Russian dump site. And the problem, particularly with old waste, is that in the Soviet Union, Ukraine was one of the most industrially developed republics, and old waste began to accumulate on its territory as far back as during the Soviet times. And currently on Ukrainian territory allocated 3,000 warehouses with store highly toxic waste, and also 465 tailing waste storages. And they carry around 16 billion tons of various types of waste, including hazardous one. And that's why the destruction of some of these storages can cause a big environmental disaster. And on this picture, you can also, on this slide, you can also see the picture from Donetsk, and with many with a lot of garbage. And the situation is that the Russian authorities, they decided to establish in Donetsk region, Donetsk and Lugansk region, a large regional dump site, and waste not only from the east of Ukraine, but also from the territory of Russia Federation, Rostov, and many other regions will be located here. The next slide, please. Nuclear threat and nuclear terrorism. The war exacerbates the problem of nuclear security and poses the question of nuclear terrorism. All 4 Ukrainian nuclear power plants are located in the high-risk zones. Accident can happen any moment in result of shelling, missile or drone attacks. or the accidental impact of their debris on reactors or nuclear waste storage facilities. Destruction of grids and a decrease in frequency in the power system cause periodic shutdown of nuclear power plants. Direct occupation of two nuclear power plants, and Chernobyl was occupied, and Zaporizhia is occupied. Zaporizhia nuclear power station demonstrates the lack of safety culture of many Russian soldiers. And I am a bright example of the ecological migrant, and the threat of nuclear disaster was the main reason of my resettling to Germany. And Russians stole some equipment from Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And Russian forces are putting pressure on the staff working at the occupied nuclear power plants, which is extremely dangerous. And the Chernobyl case clearly demonstrates the critical role of human error in causing a nuclear accident. And I contacted with some migrants from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Kiev, and it was a woman who worked in this in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and she said that except of mental pressure on the staff, Ukrainian staff, which stayed in Zaporizhia nuclear power pressure, the physical measures of pressure were used for some people, and they were put to some rooms, and physical different pressure was, and it is very dangerous if understand the things which can happen in the result of a human mistake in this particularly in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. And I also would like to stress the direct fact of nuclear terrorism. In February of this year, Russian attacked the shelter of the destroyed power unit of Chernobyl nuclear power plant with a drone. And you can see the results of this direct attack. And the integrity of shelter is broken. And at the moment, the International Commission is currently assessing the damage and its potential consequences to nuclear safety. The next slide, please. Destruction of Kakhovka has. The destruction of Kakhovka hydroelectric power station and dam in June 2023 and the subsequent massive flooding had catastrophic consequences. Direct damage of explosion reached about $2 billion and indirect more than $15 billion. And this is a striking example of ecocide, as this is a clear man-made disaster and which was deliberately provoked. And more than 800 square kilometers of territory were flooded in 4 Ukrainian regions, and over 18 settlements were affected. The next slide, please. The consequences of this disaster, this man-made disaster, can be classified as primarily secondary, short-term, long-term, and the changes affected 3 case zones: the former reservoir bottom, flooded areas, and the northeastern part of Black Sea. And in the short term, the large territories were flooded, and the fresh water from the reservoir that flooded into the Black Sea reduced its salinity. Ecosystems important for biodiversity were destroyed, and many animals perished. And among all the environmental consequences, the most threatening in the long term is the pollution by the toxic compounds which were located at the mud of reservoir during the Soviet times and during the times of independent Ukraine, and it is approximately 83,000 tons. And some of these pollutants, along with the water and mud from reservoir during the explosion, were carried out on flooded territories. And one more interesting consequence on which I would like to focus your attention is the revival of some ecosystems. And I would like to say that before the construction of Kakhovka Dam, a unique ecosystems were located on this territory. In Ukrainian, it's called splavny. It is some kind of marshes or wetlands in English, and the willows were not the dominant vegetation of these ecosystems. But no one could predict that in some months after the destruction of Kakhovka Dam, the willows began to grow on this territory, on the bottom of this reservoir. And this is a photo with the green forest of willows, is the photo of 2024. And this spring, these trees reached even from 3 to 5 meters. And that's why experts put different questions. Of course, they try and discuss the reasons of these phenomena, but also the future of these tree. And some said about the revival of pre-construction ecosystems. Some said about other consequences, and the main questions: will this phenomenon continue, and what we will see the next years? The next slide, please. And the previous slides and the previous facts which I present here, they demonstrated the forming of the large-scale environmental disaster in the territory of Ukraine. But war in Ukraine and the influence of this war has not only the local or national dimension, it has also both global and regional dimension. And this slide presents the global impact of this war. And its main manifestation is the exacerbation of global climate crisis. And the total emissions of carbon dioxide during the 3 years increased to 230 megatons. And especially this decreasing took place during the last year. It's up to 30% of decrease, and this is caused by the intensification of military activities. And the main contributors to climate change are following: warfare, reconstruction, landscape fires, energy infrastructure, civil aviation, and migration. And greenhouse gas emissions from the war are compatible to those in some countries, and one can see that the war produces even more greenhouse emissions than some countries of European Union. And another example of the global impact is the energy crisis took place in the 22 and the 23, and this situation forced many countries to diversify their energy sources. And in this result, the fulfilling some agreements, particularly on the restriction of the using and extraction and using of brown coal were suspended, and this is also the problem and very important negative impact on the global environment. The next slide, please. And this slide demonstrates the regional impact of this war. And of course, this is the territory of the European Union. And except of the energy crisis, which war caused in Europe, the impact of war is manifested in the pollution of ecosystems of the Black Sea countries and the presence of many mines, and they are spread in the Black Sea, and it's possible to predict some pollution of the atmosphere during the atmosphere processes. The next slide, please. And in the next part of my presentation, I would like to present the trends which are often remains in shadow. And one of these trends is the weaponizing of nature. And this war demonstrates the weaponizing of water, energy, and food. Of course, I would like to say that this is not the know-how of this war and of the Russian troops, because the use of nature and climate as weapons is neither can be seen in different countries in different historical periods in the times of Kiev and Rus. Particularly during Mongol invasions, locals used grass burning to hinder enemy movements. And during the invasion of Napoleon, the Russian Empire in 1812, Russian army used the tactics of the burnt earth, and this tactic was successfully used during the First World War, the Second World War, and particularly by Soviet troops during the Second World War. But the current situation is different. During this war, the weaponizing of nature has taken a new dimension and became a part of hybrid warfare tactics. I would like to demonstrate 3 examples, and one is weaponizing of water. Of course, both sides, Ukrainian side and Russian, uses these tactics. But there is an essential difference between its using. While Ukraine has used these tactics on a local scale and only against Russian military, Russia has employed these tactics both against military and civilian population. Use of dams and rivers as defensive or offensive tools. Ukraine. In early 2022, Ukrainian forces intentionally opened the sluices of the Irpin River near Kiev, flooding nearby fields to slow down the Russian advance toward the capital, and this tactic was successful. And as for Russia, the destruction of Kakhovka Dam is a bright example of using these tactics. And of course, you can compare the consequences of these tactics of both sides and the scale of these consequences. Deliberate destruction of water infrastructure. On April 2022, Russian attacks on pipeline and a pumping station cut off Mykolaiv city in the south of Ukraine from fresh water from Dnipro River. For 3 years, city lives without centralized water supply and without the quality water, and for sometimes even without water at all. Initially, authorities tried to provide city with the high salinity water from an estuary, but it corroded pipelines in the city and in devices in the flats. And later, a new pipeline was built to draw low-quality water from the Ingulets River for technical use. And drinking water is now sourced from 80 artesian wells that were specially built for this, and daily deliveries by special cisterns from nearby territories. And it's real fact, and I see many videos, and on TV this is shown that most of people every day go to the places where this cistern and take water. Control of reservoirs and irrigation systems. The destruction of Kakhovka Dam disabled irrigation systems severing over 500 hectares of farmland in 4 regions and severe damaging Ukraine's agriculture. And the dam's destruction left about 94% of Kherson irrigation system, 74% of Zaporizhia irrigation system, and 30% of Dnipro irrigation system. But if to talk in general, I would like to say that Ukrainian agriculture at the south of Ukraine at the moment is fully destroyed. The next slide, please. Weaponizing energy. Weaponizing energy is manifested first of all in mass attacks of on Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure, and as I said, that different central heating and water pumping stations and energetic infrastructure and gas infrastructure is the main targets of the Russian forces. And power outages trigger cascading effects. Central heating and water pumping stations stop functioning, leading to serious disruptions in water supply. Prolonged blackouts also disable sewage systems, posing significant public health risks, especially in winter. And of course, one method of weaponizing energy is energy pressure to Europe. The next slide, please. Weaponizing of food is demonstrating in a number of measures. But before describing this, I would like to say that before this full-scale invasion, Ukraine held the key positions in the global food system and its reality, and one can check this information in the international statistics, and in some cases, up to 80% of grain on domestic markets of certain countries came from Ukrainian agriculture. And food weaponizing is manifested in the blockade of ports and grain exports, targeted strikes on agriculture infrastructure, landmines of agriculture fields, and theft of agricultural products. The next slide, please. And some words about non-material dimension of this war connected to the environment. Masculinity of Ukrainian combatants. The horrors of war, especially in 2022-23, increased the demand within Ukrainian society for humanitarian values, kindness, care, and compassion. And one of the striking media trends which I found during the first years of the war was posting in social media and messaging platforms of images showing Ukrainian soldiers with different animals. And this reflects an effort to humanize the war through the everyday acts of care and compassion. And the wearer's image with this is reconfigured and combining not only strength and endurance and resilience and power as traditional features of combatants, but also such maybe new features as sensitivity, kindness, and capacity to care. And of course, I don't intend and don't want to say that their masculinity is changes, but I want to say that this is manifestations of the soft power are very important marks in this shifting maybe of some perception of Ukrainian soldiers and combatants and workers of the emergency service. The next slide, please. Symbolization of animals. And this is also a trend of this war and one of the new trends. And in this context, these symbolizations play several important roles. Humanizing of the war, and the animals became symbols of resistance and survival. And these animals as symbols help to reconsider their relationship with the violence, because it is really very hard. And these perspectives invites a broader understanding of violence, loss, and hidden suffering beyond the human experience. And I present here photos of some animals, and all of them has their own history and quite dramatic history, and particularly you can see on this dog, and it seems that this dog is cry, and it's this dog is really cried, and I will share his history. I cannot not say this history. And this dog, its name was Krim, as Crimea, and he lived with his family in Dnipropetrovsk. And there were grandmother, mother, and two children, girl and a boy. And the direct missile hit this house, and all this family died, and the house was destroyed. And this dog Crimea, he refused to leave this place, and he stayed in this place before his death. And that's why he became the symbol of devotion and the symbol of resistance to these horrors. And another example of symbolism is when material images of animals became symbols. And at the World Expo 2025 in Osaka, the Ukrainian pavilion not for sale represents the war through objects lost or destroyed due to the Russian aggression. And one of the key exhibits was and is a replica of an Asian marble lion sculpture stolen from Kherson Regional Museum in 2022. And you can see it's on the slide, and this lion has acquired a symbolic meaning as an image of stolen cultural heritage and as a symbol of violated identity. The next slide, please. Some words about humanism. And during the ongoing war, humanism has manifested in various forms, and one of which is a wide-scale evacuation of animals along humans. A notable example is a 20-year-old volunteer, Anastasia Tikha, who together with her husband evacuated 15 dogs, including disabled ones, 5 cats, a chameleon, a turtle, a hamster, and a spider from the nearly occupied city of Irpin. And these acts of compassion highlight the deep connection between humans and animals, and even in the most challenging circumstances. And additionally, the warm reception of Ukrainian refugees in many Western countries, and particularly in European countries, in Germany, where I'm currently living, and the openness to welcoming not only people, Ukrainian refugees, but people with their pets and with many of their pets reflects a profound expression of humanism within the Western society. And I think that it's also a new dimension of the humanism to Ukrainian people, Ukrainian nature, and to animals. And the next slide, please. And I would like to conclude my presentation. And initially, I had two conclusions, but I would like to make a conclusion maybe connected to the title of my presentation about the changing of not only map of Ukraine, but the map, physical and mental and geopolitical map of the world by this war. And although the expression redrawing the map is used metaphorically in my presentation, Russia's war against Ukraine is, in a literal sense, redefining the physical, ecological, social, and political legal configuration of space. And this is evident in several key processes. A radical transformation of landscapes and biodiversity are taking place. New conflict zones are emerging around access to natural resources. Environmentally driven migration is accelerating. The destruction of nature intensifies process of rethinking its role not only as a resource but also as a symbol of national resilience and as a domain of humanistic meaning taking place. The redefining of geopolitical realities leads to a recording of strategic priorities and spatial thinking. The war highlights the urgent needs for a legal recognition of ecocide and for the development of robust legislative and enforcement tools for environmental damage compensation. It demonstrates an expansion of warfare tactics from conventional military operations to the weaponizing of nature as a means of pressure and destruction. And the war also reveals both the strength and the weaknesses of various international organizations in protecting nature under conditions of armed conflict. And under fire are not only people, but also the land, rivers, and forests, and animals, all of those without a voice, yet who suffer no less. And in this context, nature is no longer merely a backdrop to human tragedies, but an active participant, suffering, resisting, and in urgent need of protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tetiana, for this really overarching and honestly shocking presentation. And I'm opening the room for questions and comments. I will have some questions, but first I would like to give the floor for questions. Those who are joining in online can use the Q&A window on the Zoom. So that's also a possibility to use that. But first questions, comments, Gemma.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really incredible. So I have seen on social media accounts from Russian soldiers who are trying to do the same thing as Ukrainian soldiers by taking care of animals and posting their pictures with cats, pictures with dogs, but they're in Ukraine. And so I was wondering if you see any other examples of the propagandization of ecocide from the other side, where they're trying to pick up on these social media trends that Ukrainian soldiers have been very effective at constructing.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, I investigated this topic because I made a presentation a year ago and I investigated this situation from different perspectives and I even investigated some Russian sources and it is very hard for me and some Ukrainian researchers cannot do this, but I found the differences because in Ukraine this is the move from the bottom. This is the initiative of people, of soldiers, of their relatives. And I did not find any state propaganda. I monitored also many official news sites and news channels, only some and very rare examples. That's why this is a move from the bottom. But in Russia, I found also a move from the bottom, but in Russia I found more signs of propaganda because when I open the internet page, the information and these photos, such photos were placed on the sites of Russian propaganda agencies, RIA Novosti and many others. And that's why in Russia it seems that it's some kind of modeling opinion using this propaganda, and of course by this Russia and official bodies and also Russian population can dehumanize this war and their combatants. Of course, Ukrainian need is in these pictures is also the dehumanizing, but this is a very different positions of Ukraine as a victim country and Russia as a country of aggressor country. And the things which I say, it's a really difference in these approaches to this. Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Yes, thank you so much. I am interested in that idea of the necessity of the legal recognition of ecocide. It does seem very important moving forward through this conflict. And you touched on at the end, yeah, the strengths and weaknesses of international organizations. Do you foresee that happening, or are there processes taking place around making that a formal sort of something that can be taking legal action with?
Excuse me, can you repeat a little bit loudly?
Yeah,
Because-
sure. Sorry. It's a big room.
Sorry.
No. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I'm interested in what you touched on at the end, which was this like strengths and weaknesses of international organizations, their ability to recognize ecocide as something that can be, prosecuted, or you can get some reparations through that. Do you foresee that happening in the future? What are the processes around that right now?
Yes, I understand the question. I can say what I want to be and how can I see the reality, and it is clear that this problem has not, at the moment, it's a great problem because ecocide is not recognized as the first crime against humanity. And it's a pity, but I don't see any move in this direction in the means of possibility to recognize it. That's why, of course, the Ukraine is doing its job and try to promote the recognition, but I think that it will be very hard. And but Ukrainian side and try to document all these crimes. And it is very, there are some other international mechanisms which allow to how can I say, to sue Russia or Russia, the state, or concrete participants of this crime, and to appeal for their compensations. And that's why at the moment Ukrainian different structures and different people, they try to document properly these witnesses and use them in the future in the possible international organizations. But it's to my regret, I don't see the perspective of recognition ecocide in the future. Maybe something happened, and maybe I'm wrong, and I want to be wrong. And that's why this concept of ecocide is more using as a concept at the moment to demonstrate different trends as me, and to frame this concept. And I think, but it's also very good, more we talk about this and more people understand these consequences, and the awareness can play a good game in the future. And I hope for this.
Yeah. Hello, thank you for your topic. And hear me. I'm interested in the concept of environmental. Can you hear me? Yes.
Please,
Loudly,
as
please.
loud as
Okay, okay.
possible.
All right. So I'm interested in the concept of environmentally driven migration. So in my understanding, it could be within the border or just across the border. But if they just migrate, within the border, that will make them just not like the status of refugees. I wonder that because if they are Ukrainian refugees in other countries, they get treated, they got relocation programs from other country, from EU. But if they are just migrate within the country, do we have strategies for relocation, reconstruction, and how do we estimate the impact on them? Thank you.
As I understand properly, you're asking about the environmental migration concept, yes?
Yes.
The problem is that the environmental migration is also in the international documents, and it's also not properly regulated, and the legislation in this field, both in Ukraine and in Europe and in the global scale, is not sufficient, and it is that's why most of Ukrainian migrants they are migrated and or resettled to Europe or to United States and other countries, not as environmental migrants, and they move here as the migrants as in result of the war and as the danger for their lives. And the environmental component of these migrations, it's not so essential. And however, some people they are cared of on their quality of life during the war and after war, and that's why it's play a role. And I asked some people, for example, in Germany and from different places, and it was interesting for me that because I'm a researcher, I know what is this and what is nuclear threat, and it was interesting. And I found some people who are really they were people beyond the academia and very far from this, but they said that. And when I asked them, do you want to return to Ukraine in the future? And they said, no, because the quality of rivers, of forests will be bad, and so on. And that's why this demonstrates that some people are thinking on this. But uh, as for returning to your question, Ukraine has not a strategy of in the context of environmental migration as many other countries also. Despite these questions are discussing, but Ukraine solves this problem both on the conceptual level and practical from the perspective of the whole migration. And if to talk about Ukrainian refugees, most of refugees they resettled to Kiev as the most of the most safe city, and to the western cities. And of course, there are many problems with as in such situation can happen in many countries, the problems with some location, with the job, but adapting societies invite people and integrate them very good, and particularly some more problems were during the first year of the war and the first months when crowds of people migrated, and it was of course some disorder, but now the situation has solved, and Ukraine has more another maybe problem of retaining migrants and Ukrainian migrants, because it's a great problem when 10 million of people left Ukrainian territory, and these people don't work, they don't pay taxes to the budget, and even now there is an essential problem with the human resources, because many men are taken into the army, they fight, and many women are abroad, and that's why there are many vacant places, and there are not so many people to work. And that's why at the moment Ukraine concentrates its attention on how to return people and how to create conditions and how to encourage them to return to Ukraine. And as for European countries, this is from the one hand, this is a challenge, but from the other hand, this is a win-win situation, because particularly Europe, it feels lack of also human resources, and particularly in some jobs, and that's why the European population is gradually aging. That's why they need young people and the people of productive age, and they are interested in such people. And that's why many of these countries, they want to integrate Ukrainian migrants as soon as possible, and this will be profitable for them. But for now, I don't find any strategy of Europe for the period after the finishing of the war, because it was the information that if there were some ceasefire or truce, the Ukrainian migrants could lose their status, and what their status of migrants and what Europeans will do. And I think, and as I understand, this situation is currently widely debates in both of the level of the European Union and these countries, and the solution will be soon. But it's really a great problem for the economy of Ukraine, the migration.
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. I was really interested in your discussion on weaponizing nature, and particularly the impacts on water. I know you had mentioned that due to like the environmental impacts of like water pollution, water was increasingly sourced from artisanal wells. And I'm curious if that transition to using well water was something that like the Ukrainian population was prepared for, and if there were certain regions that were like better able to respond to that transition as opposed to like other regions.
Ukrainian population, no, of course, was not ready to such situation, and such a situation at the moment, particularly with water, is desperate, and was particularly desperate in many of these districts. But people adapted, and I monitor this situation. No, I see Ukrainian youth for 3 years every day, and I can understand some dynamics, and people tried to find all possible sources, in particular in Mykolaiv and in another cities. They put bottles. They felt under the rain, that they felt them with some with the snow, and particularly authorities in many districts, they try to make all possible, and particularly this city Mykolaiv, after the destruction of this pipeline, they tried to rebuild it for 2 times. And when it was rebuilt, the Russians intentionally once more destructed it, and that's why they decided to build another to take the salt water. But the Ukrainian emergency services work very well in this situation. The immediate supplying of water with canisters is given to all regions. And as I see, of course, maybe people cannot take much water, but water is given to all people. And I was sincerely, I was very, I'm not surprised, but I was scared that I understood that all this territory is under the shelling, and despite this, under the shells, these cars of these canistras of water were supplied, and of course I think that there were some casualties with these, and but it was supplied, and despite in some places at the moment this is the only one source of fresh water, and particularly drinking water, people don't leave these territories because they say this is my land, and people don't people try to adapt, and they try to use some recommendations how to, for example, there before the war there were, in the first days of the war, there were recommendations and how to survive in the forest and how to drink dirty water and survive. And my nephew from Estonia, from Tallinn, sent me this recommendation the first day, and we bought some medical coal, and there were recommendations to put this medical coal into the water, and it will work some kind as a filter. And I bought all this because no one knows what would happen. And I think that in parallel to attempts of authorities to organize organizational supply of water, or with canistras, with artisan wells, or with construction of pipelines and attempts to take water from other reservoirs, people also invent some things which help them in such situation. I don't know details because I live in Kiev, and Kiev is more safe place.
If I may ask something as well, building a little bit on the theoretical consideration. So, as you showed on the map, the largest environmental destruction is happening in the areas which are partially under Russian military control right now. And of course, Russia is claiming these areas. They want to make it part of the Russian Federation. How much there is consideration that basically these armies are destroying their own potential natural resources, just to connect it to I mean, some of the past wars which have been studied in this respect, it has been shown that except armies which were just raiding, who actually used scorched earth tactics on a large scale, usually when armies are thinking in permanent control over areas, they don't use these kinds of weaponizing the environment because potentially they destroy their own environments. How much we see this with the Russian army, and just to flip the question, how much we see that Ukrainian army applies different tactics or can apply different tactics in this war. I mean, obviously for the Ukrainian military, probably protecting nature cannot be the main concern right now, because I mean, physically they are trying to save the life of people in the hinterland. So how much we see different considerations for the weaponizing of the nature on the Ukrainian side in this frontier zone. So these would be my two questions, more theoretical, of course.
Thank you for the question, but my answer maybe will be more practical, and I will share my opinion. To be truthfully, of course, all sides destruct nature, and of course I blame Russia, but I cannot deny that in result of different military activities and preparations of blindages, Ukrainian army doesn't use. That's why it's a pity, of course, but it's the process of destruction is caused by the both sides. And of course, the protection of nature is not the priority, neither of Ukrainian army and no of maybe of Ukrainian state currently. But as for animals, in reality, there are many facts that if when Ukrainian combatants see, for example, some animals disabled or in the threat, of course, and they can protect them, they protect, but this relates to animals. As for your question, yes, of course, logically, and it is clear that nature and natural resources, for example, forests or something else, is used for the military activities, and usually the different armies don't try to destruct them, and in most cases they try to destruct them only in the cases, For example, when some how can I say, against their counterparts, and particularly such this example of Kakhovka Dam. And from the theoretical perspective, I agree, and both on the practical, but the problem is that in Ukraine, we have not any access to Russian sites, and we cannot see the information from Russia. In Berlin, I have this information, but I have never tried to investigate how Russian army treat the natural resources. Of course, some examples of contacts of Russian army with farmers demonstrates that they are interested in receiving some food, for the army and for the Russian economy. That's why they, in many cases, of course, they intentionally don't destroy it. For example, some locations, but I mean the troops which are located on the occupied territories. And that's why they try to extract these resources for their benefit. But many hitting of Ukrainian territory from the territory of Russia demonstrates some other trends, and particularly the hitting of elevators, the hitting of grain terminals. They demonstrate other tendencies. That's why it seems that it's different in different contexts and in different locations. For example, destruction of grain terminals has more geopolitical dimension, and maybe pressure on the local farmers and to withdraw their crops and some another food demonstrate another trends of survival of concrete Russian departments. And maybe such answer on this question.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is the final chance to ask. I'm not sure if there are any further questions. If not, then this is the time to really honestly thank you for having been with us this afternoon or this morning. And we are looking forward to read the research that comes out of your most recent appointment at the Technical University in Berlin, and we are really thankful for having shared your really insightful view on this terrible war. So thank you again for having been with us, and goodbye, Tetiana.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.